I'm Deborah Doane, and I'm convener of the RINGO Project. And I just want to do a short presentation to give you an overview of where we got to in the RINGO Lab. So to remind everyone, the RINGO Lab was convened as a systems change initiative to try to shift more power and resource and build a more equitable civil society ecosystem between organizations in INGOs and those at the national and local level. And we started by recruiting people to our systems change project. We asked people to apply to be part of RINGO. We started with our inception and convening phase after we selected a microcosm of the system. And this is Southern civil society groups, people from INGOs, academics, funders, donors. It was also cross-sectoral: environment, human rights, development, humanitarian, and peace-building sectors. So we started off with our inception and convening phase. Then we went into a discovery phase, trying to understand, why is the system stuck? Then how do we overcome it? How might we find solutions to the problems of stuckness? And then designing some prototypes that would take us forward. We had 7 areas of inquiry, and they're listed here: everything from governance and accountability to resourcing, which turned out to be a very important area. And the reasons the system was stuck, and the reason we focused on that stuckness, is because RINGO was all about looking at areas of change that many have been talking about and writing about for years that no one organization could do on their own. And some of the issues were really quite deep: ego and fear, power and politics, Western superiority. And underpinning all of this, of course, was the practices, the structures, and the regulatory environment, and the perverse incentives that were behind that. That's why things haven't shifted. We came up with 4 areas of opportunity: redefining some things around, say, risk or growth, completely redesigning some of our models, our leadership models, our funding models, removing those regulatory barriers, and even coming up with some new areas of innovation. We arrived at our 8 prototypes in the system, and they came in roughly 4 areas. And these 4 areas are not distinct. There's a lot of overlap between these issues. But broadly speaking, they covered solidarity and partnerships, leadership and governance, resource flows, and accountability, impact, and measurement. And those prototyping teams started their work in March 2021. So that first year was really around defining, and then they started their work earlier this year. So the 7 areas of prototypes are now moving into an embedding phase, 7 of the 8 prototypes, which is really quite exciting. So we have the new approach to risk sharing and compliance management. This prototype was very much about facilitating and enabling a new model of risk management and moving it into something about trust management between the whole system, from your donor right through to your grassroots local CSO. And they've been facilitating what they call a brave encounter and testing this in the Philippines to try and navigate and renegotiate what is proportional risk management between all parties in a kind of aid supply chain. That will be ongoing next year, hosted by the International Civil Society Center. We've also been innovating with the Pledge for Change, which is hosted by ADESO, a new accountability mechanism. And we've been really creative about what is a fair and equitable accountability mechanism, what's innovative. And they're going to be testing those out now that the pledge has been launched. They'll be testing out those new ways of accountability globally in 2023. The 3rd prototype, South Meets North Empowership, a new framework for effective participatory grant making. This will continue to be hosted by Transform Trade and NORSAC. They are testing out new models in 2 different countries, and we hope that will be rolled out. And there's a lot of interest in this. So it's, funders have been talking about PGM, but how do we actually make it more real, more common practice? And for the purposes of RINGO, what's the role of INGOs in all of this? The language and lexicon prototype will be continued to be hosted by the Uganda National NGO Forum. They are developing really easy to use AI tools that challenges the language that we use. And they're going to be testing that out globally. And they'll be looking next year for people to beta test and roll that out and not scale up, but scale out. Get as many people using this new AI tool on changing the language that we use, and also enabling Southern civil society to communicate much more regularly with funders and NGOs in their own language. The Decolonizing Advisory Community will be hosted by WACSI, the West African Civil Society Institute. They've been getting lots of global input into this prototype. It's now a live and active community, and that will be tested globally as a platform next year. Lots of interest generated in that, and WACSI will be incubating that community for the next 2 years. For the people, by the people, an alternative solidarity model, which is hosted by Letfu Sonke in Swaziland. They are testing out a solidarity platform and also helping to still design a reverse call for proposals. And this part of it is still to be developed. And we hope that others will test out what they've learned in their environments over the next year or more. Untying Aid to Northern CSOs. This is the prototype, more an advocacy platform, which showed that so much aid is still either by procedure or law tied to domestic Northern INGOs. The Global Fund for Community Foundations is going to take all that research and work that's been done and hope to build a global campaign in 2023. We're already starting to influence the system, presenting to donors and official committees, but there's much more to be done. And finally, our climate justice prototype. The work will be continuing in that area, not as a RINGO prototype. That community in particular, it's much more rooted in the Global South and around the climate justice community. That will be continuing, and we hope to keep continuing to learn from what they take forward. There's been lots of other innovations and areas of influence that have come out of RINGO, some of them that we didn't quite expect, actually, or certainly hadn't planned for. And this has been really inspiring that people have just taken the framework, taken the bull by the horns, who've been involved in the RINGO Lab and run with it. And I'll just list a few of these. There's a whole new funding innovation platform that's been created called One World Together, which has been developed by 2 RINGO Lab members. They've had the support of their own institutions, so they didn't have RINGO coaching to go forward, but it's very much part of the RINGO community, and they'll be rolling that out in 2023. There's been a whole new community of practice working on organizational development and shifting power that's been set up by a RINGO Lab member, inspired by RINGO. There's a new community of practice that's active on innovative M&E, and they're sharing ideas and how to move that agenda forward. There's been a discussion with the Francophone community on the whole issue of decolonizing. Decolonizing, shifting power has been a much more prevalent conversation in the Anglophone civil society community. This is now taking place in the Francophone community, in particular in Francophone West Africa. That's also being led by WACSI, as well as some Francophone members of the lab. We supported some discussions around Ukraine and localization, taking the RINGO framing about why the system was stuck, what do we want INGOs to be doing, and now they've taken that framing, and there's lots of discussions now in real time happening around some of the RINGO areas of stuckness and innovation that could be done better in the Ukraine response, and we hope that that will be embedded further over the coming months. And I think I hope to say, we informed some of the Luke Hoffman Institute Future of Conservation work, which is very much about the environment sector specifically. I'm proud to say our community has grown. We started with 55 members in the lab. Each of the prototyping teams built more membership and more participation. So they were now, there's now at least 95 members of the lab participating in the RINGO project and through our prototypes, but it's also a much bigger community. We had 1,000 registrants to the Learning Festival. 73% of those people were new to RINGO, and we had 67% at least attended from 57 different countries. That figure works. active partnerships with a lot of groups, and I apologize if I've missed anyone. Obviously, the International Civil Society Center, the Council on Foundations, Global Fund for Community Foundations, and Disrupt Development have all been really instrumental in creating and building the partnerships and the work that resonated from Ringo outwards. We've got almost 1,000 subscribers to our newsletter, and I hope that we've tried and succeeded to a degree in making sure that we're not all working in silos, that the wider Shift the Power movement has been working together. There's definitely been some new ideas that have emerged through that cross-fertilization. And our kind of communications tools, aside from our newsletter, our webpage has been quite active, Twitter feed, and so on. And have we had any influence? Well, good question. In 2 years, it's quite hard to do everything, but I think we're starting to make some headway. We've done over 35 Ringo presentations to events, conferences, and boards around the world. We've had a lot of engagement from the INGO sector, which was a question that was asked at the very beginning. Who cares? We've had over 300 INGO leaders and 77 board members express an interest to lead more discussions at the Learning Festival. We've had quite a lot of funder engagement through our Funder Action Pod meetings. We've had direct funder participation in our prototypes, and we're starting to have some influence at the donor level. We've done multiple presentations to different donors. We've done a short presentation at the Development Assistance Committee, and many of the prototypes themselves are starting to take interest. Just some highlights from people about what they've gotten from being part of the Ringo process thus far. And I think the key things to take away here is the value out of Ringo has been very much focusing on the doing. It's not about the thinking about what's the vision and articulating that. It was really about getting people to move from this is what's wrong with the system and this is what we can do with it about it. And people really shared that they appreciated the cross collaboration that we had between communities of people that they wouldn't normally have been meeting. So I think we succeeded in getting people out of their silos to a degree. What have we learned about the role of INGOs through all of this? We've been very, deliberate in our attempt to just get people trying stuff out and to stay away from spending a long time working out what's the vision of the future INGO. But of course, all of our prototypes have, through their doing, identified some specific roles for INGOs. And in the first bit of research we did with WACC, where they said, what do you want from INGOs? How are those partnerships working? The 600 civil society respondents said it's not that they don't want INGOs, but they want a different relationship. They want it to work differently and they want it to work more in their favor, and it wasn't doing it. And what our prototypes told us is that they need INGOs to help be facilitators and connectors. And we see them moving away from this gatekeeper role where they get a big tranche of funding and they go seek partners to deliver that, where those in the Global South are only kind of implementing partners. We do think INGOs are going to be ultimately smaller. I think a lot of people already know that because they're going to be doing less doing, right, in that facilitation role. I think that expertise will be more based on demand. What do people in the Global South, I'm not allowed to use that phrase anymore based on my language prototype. What do people in national and local civil society need as expertise? They might need AI expertise, which we found in one of our prototypes, for example. They might need something completely different than what they're supplying today. And it has to be in solidarity versus leadership. So let's start defining what are those critical roles from below. Definitely one is in that advocacy side. More advocacy, less service delivery, less doing. People in national and local civil society who work with INGOs see INGOs as funders. INGOs generally don't see themselves as funders. There's a huge potential for them to be this co-investor in infrastructure and support systems to support stronger Southern-led national local CSOs. So seeing them more in that funder co-investor role, And of course, we expect them to be networked, genuinely global rather than northern, and working more on a virtual basis. So what next for Ringo after all of this experimentation? Prototypes are still going, as I suggested. There are kind of three key areas of work that we think Ringo will continue, hosted by WACSI, the West African Civil Society Institute. And that'll be in community, supporting the community, doing outreach, keeping this wonderful place of experimentation and mutual support connected. There's still an appetite to do more innovation and improving our practice, so that's an area we can look at. And finally, possibly most importantly, is ensuring that our prototypes don't just remain little tiny experiments, that there's something that can influence and continue knowledge building in the system and deepening the experience to ensure that not just these prototypes are embedded, but the principles around the prototypes. So that's where we got to after 2 years of the Ringo Lab. There's still much more to be done, and we hope that many people will stay on this journey with us. Thank you very much.